Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa just can't seem to shake the Phala Phala farm scandal. His alleged cover-up of the robbery and theft of $580,000 from his farm roared back into the headlines this week via the Constitutional Court. The charge was led by EFF leader Julius Malema, and he wasn't content to go after one president, as he also launched a scathing attack on former President Jacob Zuma and his Umkhonto party. Now, here's Newzroom Africa's senior reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, with a recap of the political week that was. But from me, it's bye for now.
They say there are no permanent friends or foes in politics, only permanent interests. This phrase could not have rung any truer than this past week. EFF leader Julius Malema kicked it off last Sunday as he continued his unrelenting verbal attacks of the Umkhonto party and its leader, Jacob Zuma. Mind you, not long ago, Malema referred to the MK party Secretary General Floyd Shivambu as a brother. Malema was also at the helm of his party's charge against the sitting head of state as the Red Berets brought the Phala Phala farm robbery scandal from the back burner to the highest court in the land. Then the MK party announced that it was pushing ahead with its preparations for its first anniversary rally on the 15th of December. Now, this just so happens to be on the closing day of the Red Berets elective conference dubbed the National People's Assembly. Is it a coincidence, or is this a case of former allies now trying to show each other up? On Tuesday, the country was glued to television news channels as they followed developments in the Constitutional Court. The 11 justices listened to oral arguments from the EFF and ATM on why they believe the National Assembly acted both irrationally and unlawfully when it voted against adopting the report of the independent panel into Phala Phala. By rejecting the report of the Section 89 panel, led by retired former Chief Justice Ziyanda Ngcobo, they believe the House prevented an impeachment process against President Cyril Ramaphosa over his alleged role in the covering up of the theft of foreign currency at his Limpopo farm. The panel had, among others, found that Ramaphosa may have violated the Constitution and therefore had a case to answer.
That the rules require us to focus on the information that's presented to us. There is no room, absolutely no room for us to pick and choose who we want to call. It's the information that's presented to us. If you don't present the information to us, we can't look at that information. Those are the rules of engagement.
During Tuesday's hearings, the Red Berets legal team, led by advocate Camille Premid, spent almost 3 hours making their case to the court. Yet he couldn't escape a recurring question from almost all the judges. They wanted to know why it took the EFF almost 14 months to bring the case before the court. The justices frowned upon this. To most of them, it flies in the face of administrative justice procedures, which dictate that matters must be launched without unreasonable delay.
This seems to be a classical Van Wyk versus Unitas hospital case, because here you have a delay. And please, I'm putting the case as I see it, yes. Mr. Premid, please feel free to correct me where I go astray.
I'm indebted.
You have a 14-month delay,
yes,
on the papers.
Yes.
Undisputed.
Yes.
There is no explanation for the delay. Yes. And third, most importantly, there's an argument, which I'd like to hear you on because you didn't address it at all in your uninterrupted time, that once the 6th Parliament has dissolved,
yes,
Section 49 and Rule 351 of the NA rule says, Parliament, 6th Parliament, your life is over, you're done, there's nothing left. So how can the 7th Parliament now be asked to consider work that died with the 6th Parliament? So mootness coupled with undue delay, and that is the problem that I have.
Sure.
Premid, though, was undaunted as he maintained his argument about public interest.
I fully accept what you say to me, but what we know about the discretion to be exercised in terms of the remedy is delay is but one factor. So if the court is going to consider the unreasonable delay, that's fine, but then the court also has to counterbalance that delay versus the public interest in the matter, the ongoing effect of the court's judgment and the relief that it will grant, and then the court must bring an evaluative assessment as to whether or not the complaint of delay in and of itself is of such severity that it outweighs all of those other factors. And we would submit that it doesn't in this case for the reasons that we've addressed in the papers, including public interest, including the fact this is about the president who has special obligations to uphold the rule of law, and so on. So on the subject of delay, I accept what you say to me, subject to what I've just added about the factor and the evaluation that you have to make.
At the core of the EFF's argument is the charge that the ANC abused its majority in the 6th administration to shield its president. It claims the party did so by intimidating its caucus to vote along party lines. But the court wasn't easily convinced.
You may be insulting their intelligence to say they were just told, go and vote this way. Don't even exercise your discretion. That can't be right. I don't know where can one find that. But if this court were to be attracted to that invitation, it's a difficult path to follow. And this court would be entering into the terrain of political rights, number one. Number two, the MPs are in parliament because of the confidence the electorates have on them. That vote for yea or nay represents, or it's a mandate that is carried from the electorates. So in other words, you would invite us as the court to look at the issues de novo and say, you may have voted the way you did. We don't think you voted correctly. We think this is the correct way to vote.
In its relief, the Red Berets argued for a change in the rules of how the National Assembly proceeds with an impeachment process.
In terms of the relief we seek two alternative amendment relief. It's either that the first stage becomes automatic, so in other words, where a panel says prima facie case box ticked, then that must automatically go to the committee, and the committee decides innocence or guilt. Or we say that Parliament must go and amend the rule to include factors, because those factors will then appropriately fetter the discretion that Parliament brings to bear when it makes this decision. So that's the amendment.
In support of the EFF, the African Transformation Movement insisted that the ANC caucus had ignored the veracity of the independent panel's conclusions and rushed to put the matter to a vote which they knew they would win.
How can the ANC come along and say, we're not voting for this report because there are other pending procedures with nothing to do with the National Assembly? So I start off by saying the ANC's primary reasoning in paragraph 5, and I'll come to how it fits in with the reasoning of the problem with the report. They say they didn't have, and it's in the report itself, the court will see, that the evidence hadn't been complete by these other bodies. Well, what could the ANC have done rationally? They could have said to Parliament, let's wait, let's postpone the vote. But how can they vote down a resolution on the basis of other pending proceedings in other bodies, other state institutions? And we say that in and of itself is the height of irrationality.
In its own defense, the National Assembly and Speaker's Office believe the rules that guide an impeachment process are very clear. The role and responsibilities of an independent panel are to give advice that's not binding to the House.
If the panel's findings and recommendation are binding on the Assembly, then you will be taking, if that is the finding of this court, you'll be taking out of the hands of the Assembly the assessment of whether there is sufficient evidence for the President to go on trial. And we submit that is inconsistent with Section 55(2) of the Constitution. We submit it is any such order with respect would entail an infringement of the principle of separation of powers.
President Cyril Ramaphosa's legal team argued that there had been an attempt to hold the First Citizen accountable on the matter, by virtue of the fact that the National Assembly had even instituted the process where he was called upon to explain himself before the independent panel.
The EFF does attempt to show that the application rests on a failure of the NA to hold the executive accountable, and that is a specific obligation of the National Assembly. But we say that the National Assembly has held the President to account. Firstly, the Speaker considered the motion, found it compliant with the rule and referred it to an independent panel. The Assembly, through the Speaker, established an independent panel to investigate the matter. The panel conducted an investigation. The President was required to explain and justify his conduct in what became a public forum, effectively. The panel recommended that a Section 89(1) impeachment inquiry be proceeded with, and the National Assembly considered the recommendation and didn't accept it. So the procedures to give effect to Section 89 of the Constitution were operationalized, and the President was called to account. The EFF's complaint, real complaint, is that it doesn't like the result or the outcome of the process.
A robust debate, which lasted almost an hour, then followed between the ANC's lawyer, Thembeka Ngcubo, and Justice Owen Rogers. The two fleshed out the question on whether there is a fundamental difference between prima facie evidence and sufficient evidence. This was also placed against the backdrop of the scope and limitations of a Section 89 panel, which is only given 30 days to make recommendations. The former governing party argued that the panel went on a fishing expedition and based its findings on unreliable information that would never hold up in a court of law.
Well, it was common cause several years after the event that there was no case opened.
Yes, that is true.
Just put yourself in the position of the panel, or you yourself. Perhaps 8.7 million rand is not so much money to council these days, but imagine, I'm sure I'm being facetious. Imagine you had lost 8.7 million rand.
Let me not respond. No, Justice Rogers, I mean, this is unfair, actually. I know that it's not, but it's really unfair in a matter of this public importance to make a joke like that and then to pass it on.
Let me then continue. 8.7 million rand, if, just as a matter of common sense, if a person loses 8.7 million rand, they would want to know who the investigating officer is and has it been reported to the police. Is there a case pending? And it's common cause that there wasn't.
Yes. But what is the question then for the issue that I'm dealing with?
I'm trying to
I see.
Just see the totality of circumstances.
Yes.
Then we have, and the panel paid a lot of attention to this, the source of the foreign currency, because it did, in regard to charges 2 to 4, it was not merely the fact that there wasn't a report to the, under the Prevention of Corrupt Activities Act, it was, the finding of seriousness was that that was a deliberate decision because the president was wanting to keep secret the source of the money. That's the background to where the panel was coming from. Now, in that context, it seems to me it was the president's version, based on what Mr. Ndlovu told him, that an unknown person, who is then identified as Mr. Hamaz, comes to the farm on Christmas Day, just happened to be carrying in cash $580 million, $580,000.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and then?
And then he concludes the transaction not with the farm manager, not with the man who runs the buffaloes, Mr. von Willich. He strikes a deal to buy 20 buffalo from the lodge manager.
Yes.
And hands over $580,000 and gets this receipt that we've seen. And then the buffaloes stay on the farm and are never taken.
Yes, I'm still trying to work out where, in relation to the members of the National Assembly, the criticism is.
Well, if there was sufficient evidence of the various matters I'm putting to you, then one might say that the independent panel could legitimately come to the view that in relation to charges 2 to 4, there was sufficient evidence of serious misconduct.
While the lawyers battled it out in the highest court in the land, the EFF began Tuesday morning with a picket and march from Mary Fitzgerald Square to the seat of the Apex Court. It was there, in front of scores of his supporters, where Julius Malema continued his attack on his former second-in-command, Floyd Shivambu, and the Umkhonto weSizwe party.
Fighters, we must continue to fight. We must never be discouraged. The aim is to discourage the EFF. The aim is to discourage the leadership of the EFF. And you, the ground forces, you must hold the fort and fight.
When we return, we'll look at the implications and potential consequences of Malema's continued mudslinging of the Umkhonto weSizwe party. What does this mean for the fate of the Progressive Caucus in Parliament? We'll also probe whether the exodus of senior leaders in the Red Berets signal the organization's decline. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with Newzroom Afrika as we continue to look back at a rather busy week in South African politics. Now, since Floyd Shivambu abruptly left his position as the EFF's deputy president and member of the party, the Red Berets have experienced a mini exodus. Senior leaders such as former national chairperson Dali Mpofu, Busisiwe Mkhwebane and Mzwanele Manyi swapped their Red Berets for the green of Umkhonto weSizwe. And that hasn't gone down well with Julius Malema. He's since used every opportunity and platform to slam the country's official opposition. Curiously, and perhaps for the first time, Malema's shown a vulnerability, and that's led to the obvious questions on whether his political career will survive this exodus.
Fighters, we thank you for coming in your numbers to come and demonstrate to the doomsayers who said the EFF is dead, the EFF is alive, the EFF exists everywhere. No one can kill the EFF. The EFF belongs to you, the members of the EFF. It is not a spaza shop of the Malema family. It's not an inheritance of Rata. You will decide what is going to happen to the future of this organization.
The EFF, much like the ANC, has been a casualty of the political juggernaut that the MK party proved itself to be in the polls of 29 May. Yet, for political commentators, it's become more evident that Malema is having a tougher time adjusting to being abandoned for what the Umkhonto weSizwe party calls a realignment and uniting of progressive forces.
In the first instance, the EFF refuses to call it a mass exodus, but I think for any keen observer of politics, it is quite clear that there is a problem and there is a serious migration of leaders, and not just only at a national level. I mean, you've seen in provinces like Northwest, a founder and a provincial leader in that province crossing over to MK. And of course, what makes it more difficult for the EFF, I think, is that they cannot claim that these are erstwhile leaders. As in, maybe these are people who would have undergone some disciplinary and therefore they are aggrieved with the party and this is a protest move on their part. This is really serious political considerations that are happening.
Isolate all the enemy agents and infiltrators in the EFF. Hamutwaka rabulela wakwa language yaona inalebo MK kamu otibor tsotishi. Those are the people we don't want amongst us. So people say, why would Malema declare MK as an enemy? Anyone who wants to kill the EFF is an enemy. I don't care whether you are black or white. As long as your agenda is to kill the EFF, that's why we must not support it.
Mnguni believes it is likely there had been some kind of discussion before this year's general elections about so-called black parties coming together under one umbrella. But what Malema might not have anticipated, that it would not be his party that everyone coalesces around.
The sheer volume of the momentum signals a well-coordinated migration towards MK. I think what is probably happening is that the leader of the EFF, and he's quite correct, Julius Malema, to say, between now and 2029, it's guaranteed that the EFF exists because it has seats in parliament and in provincial legislatures, and of course in municipalities ahead of 2026. I think there may well be a sense of buyer's remorse going on. Would have had some form of understanding, and other comrades are pushing, saying now it's time to act, but the leader is actually jittery about the move because it may well, portray him as a weak leader, portray him as giving up on the cause of economic freedom in their lifetime, and portraying him as having been, outmaneuvered by the Mkhonto Wesizwe party. But also, fourthly, there's this big reconciliation that has to happen between things that were said about Jacob Zuma by the EFF and then now suddenly, succumbing to his leadership. Those are serious political considerations, and in some instances, they are quite personal. And I think that's where the relationship of the Progressive Caucus is now.
Despite Malema's continued verbal assaults on the MK party, its officials opted not to respond to his attacks on Wednesday when they gave an update on preparations for their first anniversary. Instead, they characterized the current situation as akin to the black-on-black violence during the apartheid years.
The organization has made itself clear about the polemics or debates with other organizations. Our approach is very simple. Our members, and this is in our constitution, are enjoined by the constitution itself not to respond to any provocation, and in particular, not to attack other progressive forces. If other people want to do that, that's fine. That is their decision. It's a free country. But we will not be falling into that trap. You know, where we are now here, those of us who are old enough to have been in this space in the 80s will know that this place we are in here was standing on the blood of people. This particular area in KZN, thousands and thousands and thousands of our people died for nothing because of so-called political rivalry. So we shall never participate in fomenting that kind of history.
While no one disputes that the exit of leaders from the EFF has rattled Malema's proverbial cage, what remains unclear, at least at this stage, is whether his outrage is more about the organization or a bit more personal. Plainly put, is he more worried about the fate of his party or the longevity of his political career, power and relevance? According to Mnguni, the answer will reveal itself once the EFF hosts its National People's Assembly next month, where for the first time since its inception, members will elect a new deputy president.
This relationship between the MK party and the EFF is probably going to be nursed a lot now better by those who've actually left but still feel a sense of connection with the EFF. Just like there's an interesting formula with MK party and the ANC. Much as they've left the ANC, in actual fact, they don't want to create a discontinuity with the ANC. And therefore, the MK party presents itself, in my view, as an interesting vehicle where it might be able to actually reconnect the disconnected factions of the ANC. And in that sense, I think the Progressive Caucus is in limbo, but there may well be a concerted effort to try and rescue the relationship to ensure that that bloc in parliament, because remember, this is also about visibility politics. Now, those who are not in the GNU must have a political program that makes them visible to the South African voter.
While the so-called progressive forces engaged in an acrimonious tete-a-tete this week, the country's first citizen, President Cyril Ramaphosa, seemed unfettered. Instead, he delivered his annual address to the National Council of Provinces under the 7th administration. MPs followed the address with a debate on reducing poverty and tackling the high cost of living. Ramaphosa used the opportunity to highlight South Africa's potential to regain its status as a shining beacon for the African continent with regards to matters of foreign affairs.
On this Sunday, the 1st of December, South Africa will be taking over the presidency of the G20 group of countries. Together, these countries account for 75% of the world's trade and 85% of global GDP. South Africa is privileged to be leading from December for the whole year. We will use our presidency. We will focus on the theme solidarity, equality, and sustainability.
That's unfortunately all the time we have together for now as we recap the week that was on the South African political landscape. Please do continue to watch Newzroom Afrika. Next week, we'll bring you live coverage of, amongst others, President Cyril Ramaphosa's launch of South Africa's presidency of the G20. My name is Ziyanda Ngcobo. Thank you for watching.